Welcome to the first episode of this new series where we experiment with things in this game, go over them, and possibly experiment with them. And today, we're going over the test menu. I know it might be boring, and I know 99% of you are clicking off this video right now. Yes, I can see you, and I know you're breathing. But there's a lot of things you can do in this menu that are pretty interesting to mess around with. So, let's get started. First off, if you're unaware, a test menu is often seen in arcade games, mainly to see what's wrong with a machine. Now, you can't access a test menu normally. To access a test menu, you need to open up something called the Coindoor, and you see two buttons called Surface and Test. Surface is used for some other crap, and Test is, well, pressing it gives us this amazingly detailed menu. The white and the black complement each other very nicely, as you can tell. Look how beautiful this menu is, it's fucking amazing. Anyways, looking at this menu, we can see we have a lot of options to mess around with. Now, I'll just try to explain this as quickly as possible so we can get to the actual main thing that we want to talk about. All the ones with test are obvious, just to test things with the machine. Bookkeeping keeps track of stats, and backup data clear and all initialize does data related things, and that's it. And coin assignments allows you to change and increase and decrease the amount of coins required to play. But we're only here for game assignments, and just picking this option gives us a whole 5-course meal of things we can mess around with. So we're going to go over each one, what they do, and possibly experiment with them, and that's kind of what we do here. Before we do begin listing all these, you might notice that there's one player and versus variants of certain options. The only difference is that the first player affects the arcade, or story mode as it's called internally, and the versus affects multiplayer matches, so I figured I'd get that out of the way first. Anyways, let's get started with the match count. The match count is simple, it affects how many rounds there are, and the total is 5. Enemy rank is the AI difficulty, and it's exactly what you expect. It's sorted from easiest to hardest, and there's some differences between the two. But the only real identifiable difference is that the computers get more aggressive. Instead of doing their traditional playstyles, they'll often begin doing more aggressive and more, coin-stealing plays. I think we know someone that's a professional about that kind of thing. Time is a normal setting that's a max of 99. You can even set it to other specific times if you're, that kind of person. I mean, if you really want a 10-second match, you can go for it. Or, hey, even a 20-second match, but personally, that's not my kind of thing. I prefer 30-second matches. Energy and damage stats is one thing I'm fusing together because they're very confusing, but I'll try to explain them the best I can. The energy stat allows you to increase and decrease the amount of health both players has, but it's labeled as the AI rank, so I'll make it simple. But how it worked was that the easy setting toggles it to 160 HP, normal is 140, which is the default, hard is 130, and hardest is 120. And to get around this confusion, in all the other versions, they're often labeled as numbers, negative to +2. But you might be aware that in the HD versions, there's also a +3. So how does that work? Well, what the game developers did was actually pretty cool. Now, there's a damage stat that I need to explain briefly before I go into +3. Basically, there's a normal damage setting that has catch-up, and real disables catch-up entirely, including catch-up-related mechanics like Knuckles and Honey's sidesteps, for example. But what they did is that once you set this thing to +3, not only is the hardest amount of HP applied, being 120, you also get no catch-up entirely, which I think is pretty cool. It would be nice to have the option to have, certain ketchup-related features enabled, but I could see why they didn't do that. One thing to note is that in the HD ports, they're labeled as attack power, and while they aren't technically correct that it is attack power, it doesn't change how much your moves deal, it's only the health bar change, so even though that is kinda nitpicky to point out, I figured I'd mention it anyway. Barrier and barrier reset are obvious. Barriers have a max of 10, and barrier reset allows you to have the barriers refresh after each round. Automatic allows you to have automatic mode as an option in the menu. Now, for some reason, this was allowed in the Gems Collection version, which you can enable by default. However, in the newer versions of STF, they are not able to be turned on, which I think makes sense, because, well, you can just ignore it anyway. I know that one tough guy that really does not want automatic mode to be enabled on the menu is pretty pissed off about that. Hyper mode enables and disables hyper mode. In the HD ports, what they did is that they used game type to enable certain settings in the test menu, which I think is confusing. I'd rather prefer what they did in Gems, where they had each setting available to you, but I can see that from a design standpoint. Advertise sound enables and disables the intro music. Continues enables and disables continues. That's obvious. Country allows you to change the version of Sonic the Fighters that you want. It goes from Japan, USA, and export. Japan sets it to the version we know and love, however it has Japanese text. USA is actually the Sonic Championship version with the Eggman name change at all. And export is used for... it's basically the base of all ports. Display type goes from CRT to projector. CRT was used on the cabinet, and the projector was often used from tournaments from what I'm aware of. However, I could be wrong, so feel free to correct me in the comments about that one. Versus finish makes it to where if someone completes a match in versus mode, it will automatically game over for the next people who can play, and initialize sets all settings back to default. And well, that's it. So now we can experiment with some of these. Now, unfortunately, you aren't able to access these in Gems Collection. I'm sorry for the 5 people that play Gems Collection, but you know, it's just not possible. You can do it in the HD ports with a little hacking. The only way I was able to do it is by using a certain address and freezing it at a certain point, and then the menu would show up. That is strange, but to be fair, no one was expecting you to get in this menu in this version anyways, so that's fine. Some of these settings though are completely broken as expected. The time is completely wrong, and if you set it to 10, you can have 10 0-second matches. So, this will be a good option for you speedrunners out there. Country and display types don't work, but all the other ones I didn't mention, I was shocked by. Like the versus finish and automatic were completely fine. If I had a guess on as of why the country and display type don't work, it's probably due to that these HD versions and a lot of other retro games ported to modern consoles, how they usually work to fix things on the back end is that they're just the ROM themselves, and they apply patches to them. So what I imagine is that there is a patch in the game that makes it automatically set to export no matter what. And if you try changing it, it will work. And I imagine the same also applies to Gems Collection as well. However, for display type, I feel like it might be a different story altogether, since I think the projector option only really worked via the Model 2B board itself, since if you don't know, Sonic the Fighters runs on a Sega Model 2B board. The test menu in Sonic the Fighters is an interesting one to me personally. There's a lot of things that you can't do in the new versions, like the versus finish, or remove continues, or even removing automatic from the menu. But they aren't there for a good reason, as they can just be avoided naturally anyways. I'm hoping one day that maybe these can be added to the new ports via hacking or whatever people can do to mess around with. They would be really fun for people to, you know, experiment with these features. Like me. At least a good majority of these features can be messed around on Sonic Gems Collection, since that was based a lot on the test menu. Anyways, what was your favorite part of the test menu? Anyways, I'll see you guys soon.